Right. All right. So if you wouldn't mind just like introducing yourself and NPEU.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Katie Barrows, the let me restart. I'm Katie Barrows, the president of the Nonprofit Professional Employees Union, also known as NPEU, and we are affiliated with the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. So we're IFPTE Local 70. We've been around for about a little over 20 years, and we represent folks at nonprofit organizations who have unionized with us to create better and more sustainable workplaces.
And how many groups have you or are you working with currently?
So we've done a lot of organizing in the past couple of years, and during my tenure, when I started, and I was a vice president of comms then. We had about 12 groups, and now we're up to, I think we just added our 48th.
Oh, wow. And I feel like I've seen a lot in the media recently about American Progress specifically.
Yeah, so they've been a unit with us for a while. I think it was 2016 they organized, but they are in the middle of contract negotiations and trying to raise salary floors. And so they took a vote to authorize any escalation tactic necessary to secure fair wages, including a strike. And so they've been in the news quite a bit in the last couple of weeks.
And then I obviously know a little bit more about Animal Legal Defense Fund and Food and Water Watch. Are those both recent folks that you've been working with, or are they kind of older clients as well?
So they organized, I think Food and Water Watch, they began organizing and before the pandemic, and I think they received voluntary, I would have to go back and look, but in late 2019, I think they received voluntary recognition. So that means, they went to their employer and said, majority of staff have support our effort to form a union. Please recognize our union. And Food and Water Watch did do that voluntarily. The other path is going to the National Labor Relations Board, which is what happened at ALDF. Because the employer said, no, we're not going to voluntarily recognize you. We want an election for the board. And so Food and Water we've been working with, for a number of years. They are still negotiating their first contract.
So it takes a while. Kind of, is that normal for a few years, or is that unusual?
They're taking, there's been, well, there's a number of things. So the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in bargaining, but also in general, it's been difficult with them to move on their contract. We like to get contracts done with kind of, I bet a year is probably the average. So this is longer than it normally takes, and that's largely because management there has been difficult to work with. And then let's see. And so that's their first contract. LDF is is negotiating their first contract. Of course, they won their election in April, I believe, 2021. Went public in December 2020 and have been organizing, I think, since the summer of 2020, if not a little before. And so the other thing to mention is bargaining. Sometimes it takes bargaining, like to get to because folks, it's a democratic process. We elect a bargaining committee from the represented staff. It can take a little bit to get up and running and to schedule dates with management, and have regular discussions over the contract with management. So that can also increase the time it takes.
Okay. And so going back just in general, I feel like a lot of people, when they think of a union, they think of, 1920s, 1890s, like industrial unions. And it's only been very recently, I think, especially with like the Starbucks unionization efforts, that people are recognizing that unions are a little more than that, and the teacher union strikes too, I guess, of the past few years ago. But so when I'm thinking of like, there are different kinds of unions, right, for each different kind of field. And so how do people from these organizations reach out to you guys, build that connection, and then get to the point where they're visible and talking to their employer and negotiating contracts?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you know, a lot of people, a lot of folks think of, you know, unions as for factories or for construction workers, but the modern labor movement, you know, almost half of it is of like professionals. So I think it's somewhere around 44% of union membership today is professional members. So it's around, you know, like 6.2 million professionals are in the labor movement. And so the other thing is, you know, a lot of unions have, you know, may have like their like old school name, like, you know, IFPTE, like it says engineers, but they actually organize a whole range of folks. In California, they have healthcare workers and folks that work for the city of San Francisco. And then they have NASA scientists, and they do have engineers, aerospace engineers at Boeing in Washington State, but they also have folks at the Tennessee Valley Authority. And this is common for a lot of unions that, you know, their name may, you know, say one thing, but they actually have locals and members that are made up of all sorts of different employees. And so for NPEU, we used to be branded as IFPT Local 70. It was, you know, in 2017, 2018, that we kind of rebranded and refreshed our local with the name Nonprofit Professional Employees Union, so folks could realize that we were a union for nonprofit employees. And, you know, we created a new website and our logo that, you know, says nonprofit workers on nonprofit professionals on it. And from there, we've really made a push to get the word out about our union and about the benefits, because our members like are really, you know, our members are really engaged and really value their membership and see that how we're raising standards in the nonprofit industry. And so by publicizing that, that has helped us get a lot more attention and attract a lot more folks to reach out to us about organizing. So, you know, at that time we did a lot of like folks were sharing stuff on social all the time about their contracts and like what wins they have made. We still do that, but now we have a lot of active campaigns, so we publicize that as well. But we did take like a comms approach of going like using the media, using social media, using our website, and really getting the word out through every, you know, avenue we can think of about our union. And so now we have like really good SEO on our website, and so we like people are searching like nonprofit union, they get us. And so we
does that mean that there's multiple unions that nonprofit workers can reach out to, and so there's other competition?
There is competition, but we also I would, you know, we work with a lot of the other unions that represent nonprofit workers, because you know, they may have more coverage in one area of the country, or they may like you know, another union may be better at representing direct service workers. So it's they're like, it's more like we're friendly and helpful and help each other out, because we, you know, we understand that it's good for the whole industry to have more unions in different workplaces. And so, you know, we want each other to thrive. But yeah, I mean, there are like, I think before when you search nonprofit union, I'm not exactly, I can't remember now what would come up. It might have not been any union site. But now we're the top hit. And so we get at like on average a lead a day.
And is it difficult? Because I know you said there's about 48 groups that you work with and represent right now currently, right? So if you get like one a day, that's what, 365 who reach out to you with questions. What happens to those who are reaching out?
Yeah, so we're actually kind of like a victim of our own success. Like we have more leads than we can take on, and that's where the other nonprofit unions that we work with come in, that we're able to, you know, share our leads with them, and have, you know, if that's if they're not a good fit for us, if we're, we're kind of over capacity. So, it's also, we're able to work with other unions and find out like a home that would be good for those workers. So folks reach out. And then at this point, we're doing webinars about once a month to overview the organizing process and to ask questions, mostly because we just have so many
So much
leads,
interest.
so much interest that the best way to do it, rather than have 30 separate conversations each month, having one, and then being able to, connect folks with the right people or answer their questions or go over the process. So, when we, like we're taking on new leads and new groups, they would reach out, they might go to the webinar and we'd overview, and we'd have them fill out a intake form that like go over, how many folks are in the workplace, where they're located, what some of the issues are, how much interaction they've had with other staff with the idea about a union. And then our organizer would follow up with them if they seemed like a right fit, like a group we had capacity to take on. And then they would work with the lead to construct what's called an organizing committee, or a group of workers in the workplace who are committed to the union effort and who are kind of going to lead the charge. And generally that's about 10% of the workers in the workplace. So like if there was 100 workers who were eligible, that would be 10 of them, right? And so so our organizer would then follow up with them, work with them on getting the infrastructure in place to reach out to everyone else in the workplace, because the organizing committee then kind of directs folks to reach out to make sure everyone's had a conversation with that they've had a conversation with everyone in the workplace.
During the ALDIP organizing, I think we started in summer, and I was part of the smaller internal group. So I would meet with some of the NPEU per connection, and then we'd reach out to people who are staff members who might not know that we're organizing, then reach out and say it's something we're interested in. After you any questions, this is why organizing is good. This is why are you worried about dues? And so that's the point that I kind of ended with right before I moved more public.
Yeah. And so, after you talk to all your folks, and then, kind of the next step, if you feel like you have a good majority of support, is card signing. So the union cards basically say, I support a union in my workplace. And that's what you use to bring, you could either use it to go to the board, to call for an election, or you say, we have a super majority of staff have signed a card when you go to ask for voluntary recognition from the boss. And cards are confidential, like the boss never knows who signed them, but it is helpful to say, like, if you have 100 folks and you have a super majority of that, to say we have X amount, or we usually don't reveal the exact number, but to give them like an estimate of that the support is strong in the workplace, if that makes any sense. So that's then you go to your employer, or go to if the employer says no, you can go to the board. And then generally for elections, there is unfortunately, like in today, like a lot of times employers will challenge the bargaining unit or challenge some aspect of the organizing process, and that will force folks to go to a hearing, which is kind of a delay tactic. Okay. So, and in that time, management can hire their anti-union law firm, and start having the captive audience meetings and the one-on-ones, and pushing anti-union propaganda in the workplace. So that's like kind of a tactic. Sometimes it doesn't go to the hearing, but it's still a longer process. It usually, I would say on average, takes about like 3 months from the time you like ask for an election to actually happening and getting the votes counted.
And so is the election for the people who are then on the bargaining committee who work with management to negotiate a contract, or?
No, I'm saying the election is with, this is all the eligible employees for the union in the workplace to decide whether or not there should be a union. It's the alternative to voluntary recognition. So voluntary recognition, the employer can say, I recognize the union. Generally, there's a process of what we call a card check. And this is also where the cards come in, is a neutral third party will come and count the cards to make sure there's a majority. So yeah, that's kind of two paths. And so then once you get through an election, which these days is being run by mail, and then, and so you have to make sure folks get their ballots and return them and all that jazz. And then after you win your election or you get voluntary recognition, then kind of the process is surveying the membership to figure out what priorities for bargaining the contract, what the priorities should be, like what we really should focus on getting in the contract, and electing a bargaining committee or the folks that will be at the table with management or supporting those that are at the table. So if you're on the bargaining committee, you don't necessarily have to be one of the negotiators. You could be support, like doing research or something else. And then, so at that process, you would have a series of negotiation sessions with management. As I said, for us, like the average is about a year. So you talk about all of the mandatory subject bargaining, along with some, we also have language in our contracts that like our folks have really organized and are able to get things that are kind of, generally more like reach to get in because they aren't legally required to negotiate over them. So, but management's legally required to negotiate over pay, benefits, and working conditions. But we've gotten things like, a board seat, which is kind of out of the scope, but as if it's something that really matters to workers and they're organized, these are, things that we can achieve.
Many of the organizations you work with have the same things on their wish list, or does it really depend on each individual organization and the culture there?
There's definitely some overlap, but there's also like, depending on the workplace, there's, maybe more of an opportunity to get something that wouldn't, that there wouldn't be somewhere else. And also there may be something's more of a priority there than somewhere else. So there is overlap, right? Like folks generally want, good pay that, allows them to pay the bills and solid benefits, but then there can be things depending on the specific organization that they're able to negotiate for.
Yeah, because interestingly, I think like the bigger push at Aldiv for unionization was because of Aldiv's failure at DEI issues, right? And so compared to the other unionization efforts I've seen, I feel like that one was more like, here we have a culture problem. How can we try to work towards something better than that?
I would say DEI, especially in recent years, has been a big priority for a lot of nonprofit workers that we've worked with to organize. And there are, unions in the nonprofit space, or like units that are ours, in the nonprofit space. And then some of the ones the other ones I think of that are outside of the nonprofit space are like in, like with public broadcasting, NPR, and some of the digital news groups that are organized with the Writers Guild have negotiated for language around diversity in hiring, like a Rooney Rule type provision in their contracts. And, a number like our units, like Center for American Progress has negotiated for diversity in hiring provisions. We have a number of units that have pay equity reviews that, after those happen, the union and management, like the union can look at it with management and work on, making sure that there's no pay disparities based on, race, gender, or another protected class. So DEI has definitely been a top priority for a lot of workers, including our members.
And I feel like a lot of people have noticed or feel like there's been a increase in unionization efforts in the past like few years, especially after COVID or you know, supposedly a post-COVID world. And I read something the other day that maybe it's because younger people are more interested in unions. What does NPEU think about this? Are this interest in union increasing? Are more people interested in unionization who are younger?
So as I mentioned, when we rebranded in like 2018, we did like see a lot of interest in that. I do think that there are like the younger folks, like whether it be like younger millennials or the Gen Z folks, have kind of, a lot of us have like college debt. And then we entered the workforce and like kind of, had high hopes for our careers and our first jobs and our ability to like one day buy a house. And then, we're at these organizations that provide insufficient pay, and then you're kind of a lot of folks are stuck if they can live with family members or just struggling to pay their bills. And I think that has made folks kind of look around and be like, we got to do something about this. Enough's enough. So I do think, there has been definitely increase in organizing in sectors that we just haven't thought of as like places with unions
labor.
yeah. The one unfortunate thing is the numbers. So the BLS puts out union membership numbers once a year, don't exactly reflect that as as much as I would like. I think part of that is those numbers so they don't really show like if there's been a gain here, like there's been like those numbers like show there's some losses, but the numbers are also behind. It's not a great sample. And also like making gains in new industries, there may be losses, in the public sector or somewhere else. So those numbers make it kind of hard to tell, but the
anecdotal experience and NPEU's experience.
Yeah, the anecdotal experience, makes it seem like there is a lot more interest in, especially in our space. And like, yeah, so I would also, unions have, I think there's been like folks have gotten a lot more savvy with communications and become a lot more visible. And that's been, I think that helps, that also helps like, I always say like organizing begets organizing. I think the more folks you see organizing, the more that motivates and starts kind of momentum for other folks to begin organizing.
Yeah, I feel like until you see someone successfully organizing or organizations successfully organizing, you are so afraid of the repercussions, especially if it's already in a culture that there are workplace issues, and I feel like people fear that they're going to be fired, right? If they even vocalize any kind of dissent in any way.
And with labor law being so weak, like we really do need labor law reform, because there really aren't any, there's not really any punishment for employers when they break the law and they violate workers' rights. And so like kind of the only good like substitute, well, it's not, but the kind of way to combat that is to have high density in an industry of union members. And so that also, if people are scared and like they haven't seen anyone else do it, they like, yeah, they might have reason. But if your industry, there's a lot of union organizing going on, then, that makes people feel more comfortable.
I think this fear of retaliation that a lot of staff have, is that unfounded? Because I know at ALDF, at least I've heard stories of them promoting staff who are anti-union or at least not vocally pro-union so that they are. And then with Food and Water Watch, I've heard that, 4 of the bargaining staff were fired.
Yeah, so there they had layoffs, strategic layoffs. That doesn't seem to be
okay.
I mean, it doesn't, well, at least for union activity, it doesn't seem to be. I would say, it does, like, stuff does happen, like, right, like people wouldn't be fearful if it didn't happen, but I would say like the best, like a lot, it's not super common either. And the one of the best way to combat it and to make sure you're not retaliated against is to have a really strongly organized workplace so that folks like are standing together and no one person can be picked out and like you know take fired or what have you. And also if you're loud and proud, that also like the more publicly are, the more protection you tend to have, because if something happens, like
Then it's an
you do
actual
have,
liability if you think you were picked out by it.
yeah, you actually have a platform, like, and are able to call it out. So yeah, I mean it's a real fear, and it's a real thing that can happen. But if you're a well-organized workplace and like you're all standing together and supporting one another, and also like you're vocal about it like that provides some level of protection. But we do need the PRO Act, which would impose monetary penalties on employers who broke the law. And I think that would, be really, that would hopefully dissuade most employers from doing anything. Of course, like the big corporations who have tons of money, that may be less, they may be less worried. But I think the penalty is like $50,000 for each, or the proposed penalty is $50,000 for each violation. So that could add up real quick, right?
And so that could be a deterrence for the organization, for the management. I mean, going back to management, you're talking about captive meetings, work with union busting firms. Why do organizations do that? Is it all just financial security for them? What kind of things do you see management doing when they hear that their organization, their staff are organizing?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. So when we're going back to like organization management doing things like captive meetings, working with union busting firms, what do you see these management doing once they realize that their staff are wanting to move towards unionization? And how does management sometimes try to deter that effort?
Yeah, I mean, so like usually they continue with their union busting effort. Like ALDF and the Scholars Strategy Network, they went to an election, but they didn't go for the whole union busting campaign, pardon me, that ALDF had. But they hired a law firm or a consultant, and then and then there's other firms. There's a anyways, so they hire like this group of, usually it's a law firm that specializes in what they call union avoidance. And those folks either will begin doing presentations to the group, or they train management on how to do presentations. And they'll do things like, they looked at like our social media and be like, oh, like, look at what they said here, and like try to like make the union look bad and shady, tried to say like, oh, you'll just be paying dues for nothing, and like your dues will be astronomical, when they really like have no idea how much it'll be. And they'll make it sound like you pay dues right away. Like, you don't pay dues until you have a contract, and those dues, especially for us, we have really low dues, go to servicing the contract and representing our members. Like some states, and it's like very few, but don't, it makes it illegal for mandatory mandatory captive audience meetings, but for the most part it's allowed. And then they'll also have like one-on-ones, so like a manager will take a unit and someone who would be in the bargaining unit into their office and like have a conversation with them, kind of intimidate them out of supporting the union effort. And then there's all the propaganda, like we've seen with REI, like a website that's a whole union busting website, and they even put out a podcast. Oh yeah, they have put out a podcast that it like talks about why there shouldn't be a union at REI. While a a lot of it's like, oh, we support unions, but just not here, which is
Mhm.
it's more common in the progressive space than you would think. And Aria kind of sees themselves in a progressive org. So there's like a number of tactics, like it's mostly fear, like they're trying to scare people and you won't get raises, you'll actually, they always say things like, oh, everything will be on the table so you could lose stuff. Well, no one's going to vote for a union contract where you could where you're taking away benefits. That's not how, like that's not what happens.
And so does the response, like the response from the organization, is it just fear out of having to pay their staff more? Like where does this response come from?
I don't think it's just pay. I think it's power, right?
Mhm.
So no longer like the employer no longer has all the power. It's now that the members get a voice, and or the members of the union get a voice and kind of get to like have a say in decisions. And like that's scary for a lot of people. People do not like to give up power.
Because you think the PR would be so bad for so many of these organizations that it wouldn't be worth it.
It's funny.
Funding.
A lot of them, the PR effort like works. Like it's a pressure point we use, and we use it for a reason because it works. But there are some orgs that just do not care.
Really?
Which they just do not care, and they'll dig in their heels. But that's why we organize, and then we get to an election, and if we talk to all the members and really conveyed what's possible with a union in the workplace, then we win the election, and the employer just wasted a whole bunch of money for nothing. I would say they're wasting a whole bunch of money in general, that's the other thing, like the amount of money these folks spend to avoid unions and to avoid like paying folks a living wage is just kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's ridiculous to me. So are there any cons of unionization then, if people are so afraid of dues, or is it really just all this baiting fear so that staff don't unionize?
Yeah, it's so like they like to say a lot of things, right? You'll pay a bunch of dues, but also they will say like our clients or our donors will disappear, like they won't want to work with unionized staff because it's more expensive or whatever. So like they just like they scare people into thinking that, oh, you'll get late, like we won't be able to afford as many people, we'll lay you off, or we'll have to shut down. Like they scare people and think like, well, I might lose my job, and like it's hard, even though there's a lot of media attention to like the like job or the like worker shortage. Mm-hmm. Like finding another job is still difficult, and especially finding another job that is like the same level and like pays competitively and provides good benefits. That's still difficult even in this like worker shortage narrative. But
after I left ALDF, I was trying to work. I did freelancing for a while, and now I work as a paralegal with no benefits and no PTO, right? But like I just couldn't stay there.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. I think there is this narrative which is kind of crappy. I would say there's not really a worker shortage, there's a good job shortage, right? Like a lot of places don't, they're not abiding by the rules of capitalism by like raising what they're offering to attract workers. Instead, they're like, oh, we're gonna just like offer you this kind of mediocre salary and no benefits or mediocre benefits. And if you don't take it, then there's a worker shortage, right? And that's kind of
this labor revival for me just feels like things got so bad we just couldn't literally afford to live anymore, and we're like, fine, like just try to fire us all.
But yeah, again, people are afraid. Like in America, like your job's your livelihood, your health insurance is attached to it in many cases. Like it's scary. Like I get it. But you have to, like, that's why we're trying to like educate folks and realize like, yeah, like you can get through that scary process and make things better. And if we have enough solidarity, enough support, like you're going to be fine in the end. So
when you're thinking about NPEU's strategic goals for the future? What do you think will happen in the next year? You know, what's the organization's hope for growth in the future? What does that look like?
So we have probably at this point, maybe more than 30 of our units at the bargaining table, either bargaining successor contracts or first contracts. So my hope in the next year or so is to, you know, get as many contracts done as possible. And you know, strong, solid contracts. So that way we will have, you know, maybe the ability to, you know, hire even more staff. We did just hire a second full-time staffer. And then also like, you know, be able to represent our members and continue like the organizing growth that we've had in the past. So what I really like to see and what I'm planning to see is like strong first contracts bargained and ratified in the, you know, the next year or so. And then, you know, in the next couple years, like continuing to take over the nonprofit space by, you know, organizing staff. So we're going to raise standards across, you know, the sector.
Awesome. Do you have anything else you want to add to our conversation, or anything you think I should highlight in the piece?
I think you've asked me everything about it.
Awesome. Let me just go ahead and stop the recording.